Okay, so this is the fourth video lecture on the topic of early adulthood or emerging adulthood. In the previous video lecture, I ended up not doing a very good job of keeping these topics separated, but we were talking about the cognitive stage model. And in this one, I want to pick up and talk more about some theories of cognitive development as they relate to middle or early adulthood, and then move on to some other psychosocial sort of stuff. So the first thing here, we've got this model called the triachic. I had to look that up, theory of intelligence. And again, when we're talking about cognitive development, we're talking about how people learn to think, right? Or how their thinking changes. And intelligence is not what you know, but it's how you think. It's your use of thinking. And this model says is that there are really at least three different ways to know in the world. And so you've got computational, experimental, and contextual. And the idea is that, kind of like when I was talking about in the previous lecture, is that as you move into these early stages of your life course, or the early or your middle adult stages, your ability to think more abstractly is improved. And so you shift from this one level of intelligence, or this one level of intelligence, which says you use information to problem solve, to experimental. This is where you create new ideas. And then the contextual component of this triachic theory of intelligence says is that we can modify our ideas to help us problem solve in that particular context. Also significant in the context of cognitive development is you have this one down here. So of course you got practical intelligence, right? That this is the kind of knowledge that we gain by watching people, or maybe this would be referred to as someone who has good social skills. I talk a lot about social skills in my sociology class because the idea is that you observe other people and you figure out how to act, right? That you're quick to pick up on social patterns, you're quick to modify your behavior in response to the environment. And so our textbook is referring to this as practical intelligence, or social radar. Along kind of similarly, but more psychological, on the psychological side, is this idea of emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence. So we often talk in higher education about something called soft skills, and soft skills refer to like social skills, your ability to get along with people. Under this umbrella of soft skills is emotional intelligence. And I think this used to be a quiz question, so I might want to draw your attention to what we mean by emotional intelligence, but it actually has two components. And emotional intelligence is your ability to be aware and to know your own emotions and how to regulate your own emotions. But it also implies that you're able to interpret the emotions of other people, right? So emotional, or EQ, sometimes it was popular and there were books for a while about your EQ, but it's your ability to know your own emotions and respond accordingly, but also to read other people's emotions so that you can regulate yours in response to theirs, right? So that's your emotional intelligence. And then we're going to call creativity just the ability to think in different ways. So all of those are different aspects of intelligence that are important for success in a social environment. Okay, let's talk a little bit about higher education. You are all obviously a part of higher education. One thing that I think is really worth pointing out is that the majority of people who start a four-year education, traditional college students, don't finish in 4 years, and only a little bit over half of them actually finish in 6 years. So if you are going to get through a 4-year program, and I realize none of you are in a 4-year program right now because this isn't a 4-year program, but it is not likely, right? Statistically speaking, you are in the minority if you're going to complete a 4-year program in 4 years. But there's all this pressure on young people that that's how it's supposed to be done, and it's simply not how it gets done. Okay, an interesting sort of trivia is that there are more females in college than there are males in college, but that pattern begins to shift when you get to advanced degrees. So at the undergraduate level, you have more women graduating with undergraduates, and when you get to a master's degree, and certainly at the PhD, those begin to shift. And there's some theories that maybe women are dropping out to family form, but I always think about, well, aren't the men family forming too? But anyway, so women are more likely to graduate with a 4-year degree as opposed to men. And you can see some of the statistics there. It's a lot different when you start talking about, when you add the element of race and when you look at like Black women compared to Black men. Maturation reform is simply a fancy word for when you hit your early adulthood, you begin to change so that you can take care of other people. So when you hear people say, well, I had kids, I had to get my priorities straight, they're talking about maturation reform. I'm not sure what that means on here. 2/3 of community college students are 22. I don't know why that's on there. Here's a really important concept though, and there's actually a discussion post about this one right here. It's italicized. First year adjustment reaction. One, I think actually in the discussion post, I call it syndrome, but this is I think something I wish I knew, and I am very sensitive to because I work with so many first year students, and I was very sensitive to it when my daughter was a first year in college. But this is the first year that's characterized by anxiety, depression, loneliness. We glorify it in our culture that, oh, your freshman year is wonderful, but in fact, it's very hard. And in fact, it's not commonly a really good year. It's so common that it's not a good year. We actually have a word for it, and that's called first year adjustment reaction. And I think kind of ironically, it's actually harder for students that were high status in high school. So if you come out of high school and you are, and you're the head cheerleader or the head, or, the quarterback on the football team, or the, whatever, you were very popular in high school, that first year, you ain't nothing, right? So you go from being the top of the pile to being one of maybe hundreds, maybe thousands of college freshmen, and that can be quite a shock, right? So it can be a very difficult transition. And in one of the discussion posts, I ask you about your first year. Hostile sexism, benevolent sexism. We talked about this back in the chapter on got my classes confused. Basically, isms are any attitude where you think another group is less than. So a hostile sexism would be a blatant hostility towards people based on sex. Typically, it's towards women, not always. Benevolent is so it's disguised as if we're trying to protect someone or trying to be nice to them, but the consequence are that we don't give them the same resources. So hostile sexism, maybe in higher education, would be something like, I don't know, women are in one of the trade programs and they're told that women are too dumb to fix cars or something like that. Or they're told they want women to bend over so that they can see how their uniform fits them from the backside. That would be hostile sexism and plain old harassment, and probably trigger a Title IX violation. Benevolent sexism might be something like when you invite the girls to your study group, and you give them the easy questions, right? Because you want to be nice, or, you invite them and ask them to bring dinner because women are just so much better. A friend of mine did her dissertation and she was looking at women in engineering, and she had many instances of this, that women were typically excluded from study sessions, but when they were invited to study sessions, they were asked to bring food for the group, right? So that would be an example of like benevolent sexism. Or here, let me help you with that. So that, say, using my trades example, I point this way because that's where the buildings are. But in the trades example here, let me help you do that, right? And so instead of a woman learning the skill that she needs to be successful in her trade, right, we see her as less than, right? So that would be a form of benevolent sexism. What's it say? Dropping out 60% graduate. Okay, I've already talked about that. Okay. The next topic then, and I'm going to stop it again because I'm at 10 minutes, is going to be about some of the theories of personality development and happiness and friendship, and maybe we'll talk about love.